Well, it's not just that it's travelled so far south, but it has, as I say, hugged the coastline, which is a strange course for it to take. But clearly, its intention is to gather intelligence, and we're very conscious of that. That's why we've had the P8s in the air and the other surveillance techniques that we've been able to deploy. But it does cause us concern, and there are previous instances where we've had, particularly around Operation Talisman Sabre, but also activity on the east coast. But for it to come south of Exmouth and to hug the WA coast in a direction that it's tracking at the moment up toward Darwin, that is unusual.
Have our defence forces attempted to communicate with
Well,
them?
they have provided the monitoring through the surveillance aircraft and through any fleet assets that we would seek to deploy. And if, in terms of the operational aspects to it, otherwise not something that I would speculate on, but there is essentially an international protocol which would normally include that contact to the Australian authorities. That hasn't happened, and they'll continue to do what they believe is in the best interest. But it's best that people are made fully aware of what's a very unusual path and course that they've taken.
What sort of information do you think the Chinese can gather from doing this about submarine routes or anything else?
Well, there's certainly the desire for them to look hydrographically, which is why they send vessels from time to time. So to look at routes for submarines, to look at coastline facilities, and importantly, the Harold E. Holt facility, as you know, is in that vicinity. So they will be seeking to target that particular location and other military installations that we have along the WA coast.
Do you think the Chinese are sort of sending a message to Australia during the federal election with the timing of this vessel?
Well, again, it's strange timing, and it's without precedent that this vessel would come so far south, and that it's tracking, essentially hugging the coastline, heading up now in the direction of Darwin, is not a usual practice, and we're monitoring it very closely.
Does the fact that we are in the midst of a federal election campaign have anything to do with you coming out with this information now? Do you always make this information available to the public?
Yeah, well, as I say, we've had vessels in our waters this year, and we've made the public aware of those around Operation Talisman Sabre. From memory, there were 2 PLA Navy vessels deployed during that time, and again, they would have had the same tasking. It went down the east coast because Talisman Sabre is an east coast training exercise, but this is an unusual activity on the west coast at the moment.
When did you first learn about this particular vessel, and have you travelled to WA to make this announcement?
Well, I haven't disclosed when we were first made available, and that's on advice from the Australian Defence Force. They don't want that released for operational reasons, and that's something obviously that I would respect.
So why are you choosing to come out with this information now?
Well, because I think it continues the practice that we've had before of making the public aware of the activities of these vessels. I think people understand the difficulty that's the reality of the Indo-Pacific at the moment, the aggression, the acts of aggression from the Chinese leadership and from the Chinese government. I think Australians deserve to know what is taking place, and as I say, it's a repeat of a previous practice where we've made the public aware of these activities before.
How would you characterise this ship right now? Is it an act of aggression?
I think it is an aggressive act, and I think particularly because it has come so far south. For it to come south of Exmouth is without precedent, and for it to hug the coastline the way in which it has and heading up toward the north. Now, we don't know whether it deviates and goes directly north, but at the moment it's heading in a northeasterly direction. We don't know whether it continues to traverse across the northern approaches across the north of our country, or whether it goes back up further in a more northerly direction than what it currently is. But that's something that we'll monitor at the moment, and I think it's best that we're able to release that detail.
Have you travelled to WA specifically to make this?
No, not specifically for that. I'm here to see a number of our members in seats, so supporting the campaign effort here in WA, and but obviously appropriate that I wanted to stand up today in relation to the floods. We've had a meeting this morning with the Prime Minister, the Chief of the Defence Force, and others, including Bridget McKenzie and some of my other colleagues, just to talk about our response and to make sure that we're prepared for whatever happens in the southeast corner of Queensland at the moment, and of course take the opportunity to provide you with the information.
The WA Premier yesterday, I think this morning as well, he spoke about your public commentary around the relationship with China, and he said yesterday that we should have a productive relationship with China and diplomatic issues should be dealt with behind closed doors. He didn't get why you talked about war, and he found that kind of conversation frightening and grossly irresponsible. So what do you make of his comments, and why are you so keen to discuss these issues so far?
Well, I think it's best to be open and honest with the Australian public, and this is not a problem of Australia's making. It's not a problem of Japan's making. As we know, there are Chinese militia vessels in the East China Sea that are bumping up against the Japanese Coast Guard vessels on a daily basis. They're there literally in their hundreds. Now, that's not an act of aggression from Japan. It's not Japan that's changed. Japan speak freely about those matters, as they should. In India, on the land border between India and China, there have been Indian troops killed at the hands of Chinese troops over the course of the last 3 years. And that's not India that's changed. It's not an act of aggression from India, and India rightly would speak out against that activity. Where we see acts of aggression in our own region, we're right to speak out about it. We're standing up for our values. We're not going to compromise on our democracy. I want a normalised relationship with China like anyone. I don't want to see them continue down the path of aggression. But if we believe that by saying nothing or pretending that nothing's happening, that somehow the problem will resolve itself, I just don't think people have learnt any of the lessons of history. You see this collaboration now between Russia and China, between President Xi and President Putin. And if Premier McGowan doesn't believe that that's a reality, it is. I mean, that's the circumstances in which we're living. And when you look at what's happening in Europe at the moment, that causes us great concern. I mean, it's a statement of the obvious that we have one of the most incredible success stories of migration to our country of people of Chinese origin. And people of Chinese origin and heritage contribute incredibly to our country. They abide by the law, they educate their children, they work hard, many of them involved in small businesses. They're incredible Australians. Our beef is with the leadership of President Xi, and the beef is with the leadership of President Putin, as we're seeing in the Ukraine at the moment. So I just think we're better off to stick to the facts and to stop the personal attacks. Mr McGowan can have the personal attacks, that's an issue for him. But for me, my job is to keep our country safe and to speak frankly about the threats that we see. The AUKUS deal, which is supported by the Labor Party, at least at the time, I mean, they've crab walked back from certain elements of it now, but the Labor Party supported that because they understood that the AUKUS deal was the underpinning of security in a very uncertain region. And if Mr McGowan is at odds with Mr Albanese on those matters, then that's something he should talk about.
Just adding on to that, the Premier has also this morning described your approach to China as nutty. What do you make of that?
Well, again, I just don't. I don't think you've got much in the bank when you resort to these personal attacks. If there are facts that I've stated that he disagrees with, I'd be very happy to hear them. But I just don't see where he's pointing out that we're factually incorrect. We're being honest with the Australian people, and these personal attacks, I think, say more about Mr McGowan than they do about me.
Mr McGowan seems to be emphasising the importance of the economic relationship with China.
Which we all agree with.
But do you believe that these matters pale into significance when it comes to national security?
I think we can have a normalised relationship, which is what we want. But as you know, the Chinese ambassador produced a list of 14 requirements for us to normalise the relationship. Australia's not going to stay quiet if we see human rights abuses. We aren't going to surrender our democratic rights. We aren't going to be silent and to be a tributary state. We've been very clear about that. And if that's the requirement for the relationship to normalise, then if the Labor Party's saying that they will agree to those 14 points, then Mr McGowan should say so. But it's not. It's just personal attack that he's involved in. It's in the midst of an election campaign, so I suspect that is his motivation. But for me, I want to make sure that we can take decisions to keep our country safe. And that's why we're investing $270 billion in this decade. It's why we're spending $8 billion across the north of our country in the northern approaches. It's why we have invested more into the Australian Defence Force, and we're making up ground, because when Labor was there, they ripped money out of defence. And that's the reality of the way in which Labor approaches the defence portfolio. There's always a higher priority. They always take money out of defence to spend elsewhere. And I don't think, particularly at the moment, that's in our national interests.
You say you're not
Last
politicising.
question, thank you.
You say you're not politicising these types of issues, but then you bookend a response like that with the coalition's record in defence. How can you say that you're not politicising?
Well, I'm responding to the question by Labor's Mark McGowan. I mean, you didn't preface your question by saying, Labor's Mark McGowan has said this in the middle of a campaign. You just gave the quote. So I've just responded to that, and I think he's making a political point. I think he's running a personal, slag line because we're in an election campaign. But I think it says more about Mark McGowan than it does about me. I think West Australians know that this government stands for keeping our country safe and taking the decisions that are necessary to keep WA safe, to keep our country safe in a very uncertain time. And it's a huge risk at this election to go to Mr Albanese, because they just don't take defence seriously. They rip money out. You see Mr Marles' activities, you see the decisions that they made when they were in government of taking money out of defence. That's the reality of what Labor does, and we've paid a price for that. We're less safe today because of the money that defence had taken away from them when Anthony Albanese was the Deputy Prime Minister of this country. So there's a big decision. If you're concerned about the national security of our country, if you're concerned about the situation in the Indo-Pacific, then Scott Morrison, myself as Defence Minister, and the coalition government is a much safer bet at this election, because we are not going to risk our national security. We'll take the tough decisions that are necessary to keep our country safe. And Anthony Albanese doesn't have that track record. He doesn't have the people around them with that track record. And I think people should bear that in mind in the run-up to this election. Thank you very much. Yep.
What do you make of the Prime Minister referring to himself as a bulldozer when it comes to issues?
Well, look, I've worked very closely with the Prime Minister for many years. I've seen him under enormous pressure during the course of COVID, when we were faced with the prospect of tens of thousands of deaths, when unemployment was projected to go to 15%. And I've seen him make tough decisions. And we've had confronting advice, very few options available to us. I mean, when he took a decision to close the border with China, that was what really saved our country from what we saw in Europe and in Asia, in North America, etc. We took decisions that were tough, and he has had to take tough decisions. And you want a strong leader at that critical time. And I think he's made the decisions that he believes are in our best interests of our country. And he's made comments in relation to the approach otherwise today. But from my perspective, what I've seen is somebody who's looked at the options, seen our country through dire circumstances. We could quite easily have 15% unemployment today. It would have been a sliding doors moment had we not closed the border with China. If we had had the plane loads of people coming in with the virus into our country. But we've been able to work closely with the states and with other authorities to see our country through a very rough time. So I understand people have gone through a lot of pain right across the country over the last couple of years. But we are in a stronger economic position today because of the decisions that Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg have taken. And we don't know what the future holds, but we do know that there's uncertainty in our own region. We know that there's uncertainty on the economic front. And I'll tell you what, now is not the time to change to an uncertain team in, people that sat around the table with Kevin Rudd. They have a bad track record, and they are not the people that you want in charge at a time when you need strength for our country. All right, thank you very much.